On this week's episode of Circles Off, NBA is in full swing. So we're bringing on an NBA guest. He originates the sport. His name is Kirk Evans, and he's also going to give us 3 super hot takes for this upcoming NBA season. All that and more. This week's Circles Off starts now.
Come on, let's go!
Welcome to Circles Off, episode number 125, part of the Hammer Betting Network, presented by Pinnacle Sportsbook. I am Rob Pizzola, flying solo today. No Johnny from BetStamp, but I do have Zach Phillips across from me. Zach, how's it going?
I'm pretty good today. Halloween coming up around the corner, so excited about that.
I am
25s as well. So.
I am too. 25 was a very popular steroids power hitter number when I was growing up.
Yeah, I didn't realize like how much it was, and then we were just talking about it, looking through some of them. There's a good roster there.
Oh yeah. Well, Barry Bonds and Mark McGuire were the obvious two. Jim Tomei as well. Huge power hitter back in the day. Was a 25. In football, I remember Jamal Charles wore 25. I only remember that because I played fantasy football and had Jamal Charles for years. But outside of that, it's very hard for me to think of other. Richard Sherman.
That sorry-ass receiver.
I loved Richard Sherman. I still really like Richard Sherman.
I like him. He's high energy. So it makes it exciting, right?
Yeah, Richard Sherman is actually very intelligent, very smart person.
Didn't he go to Stanford?
Yes, but I'm pretty sure Stanford. But when he's on this panel for the Amazon Prime games, it's like he doesn't get the gimmicks that they're doing. Like they're going way over his head, and he's like being really serious on them, and everyone else is like telling him to lighten up and whatever. I find that really funny.
Yeah,
a memorable moment for number 25 for me. Hate to make this Toronto sports talk radio, but the Leafs and Senators had a big rivalry when I was growing up. They always used to play each other in the first round of the playoffs, and the Leafs always used to win because the Senators sucked. Well, not really the Senators sucked. The Leafs always had a great goalie, whether it was Curtis Joseph or Ed Belfour. Game 7, the one where Patrick Lalime shit the bed for Ottawa, Joe Nieuwendyk, number 25, popped a couple horrible goals. One, he just crossed the blue line and took a wrister, and that went in. That was a big one. Dave Andreychuk, another Leafs 25 as well.
Oh, nice. Yeah. James Van Riemsdyk, after they made him switch from 21 with the Leafs, he was 25 at his time here. Vince Carter with the Phoenix Suns for a little bit.
Oh, look at you.
LaShawn McCoy.
Carried around the football like a loaf of bread. Never seen someone who just held it like a loaf of bread like this away from his body as much as LaShawn McCoy. We're going to get into a few things here. We do have a very special guest. I always call every guest a very special guest. We have a guest. I don't want to say it's very special. It's a guest. But I think this is going to be a really interesting
It's a very good guest.
Very good guest.
Yes.
Coming up, I'm asking for a pre-like today. Smash that like button down below before you even hear the interview. Our view to like ratio, we need to get that up. We need the likes up. Smash it. Hammer it. That like button down below. We're also going to do a contest. We'll do a little giveaway. Little giveaway here. Halloween coming up. I'm a big fan of Halloween. I almost got canceled one Halloween.
Oh, no. Trudeau?
No, by
you know
Twitter.
What I'm talking about.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. I almost got canceled by left-wing Twitter. I don't associate left-wing, right-wing. I'm pretty central. I'm like morally liberal, fiscally conservative, I guess you would say. Whatever. I don't care. I posted one year.
And that's talking politics.
Yeah, listen, but like, I just don't try to engage in politics, right? I don't think of myself as someone who's cancelable because I think I generally have good morals. Let's just put it that way. I was raised the right way. I don't hate on people or whatever. But I posted one year, Zach, on Twitter that I like to give better candy to the kids that put more effort into their costumes.
I think that's fair.
And if the kids show up in like a LeBron James jersey and say trick or treat, I give them some lollipops or Tootsie Rolls. Or it's not like I'm throwing a grenade into these kids' bags. I'm still giving them candy, but I like to see effort. I love Halloween. It's my favorite thing. It was my favorite thing growing up. Even, you don't have a lot of money, wrap yourself in toilet paper, go as a mummy. There's some effort. Like one kid did that last year. It was amazing. Amazing costume. But these people They tried to cancel me for having this take. Rob, way to
ridiculous.
ruin Halloween for these kids. like I'm putting razor blades into their bags. Like, I'm still giving them candy, people. I'm still giving them candy. I just appreciate the kid who takes a little bit of extra effort.
I think that's fine. I think that makes sense. Like, you know what? I was my mom used to make our Halloween costumes, like hand make them, very crafty with that. So I always had some really, really good costumes. And then you just see kids wearing like the morph suit and like a jacket and shorts. I'm like, the thing costs like $25 and you just threw it on. You're walking around in the green suit. Like, you're not really doing much for Halloween here. It's not, put some effort in. It's a fun thing.
It's a fun thing. I go to Halloween and Cheese every year with my friends. Big party. We dress up. We drink bottles of wine, have some cheese.
I got a recommendation for you. Maybe try this year, or maybe don't. I don't know what the legality of this.
I'm going to have to do. Remember, I'm going to have to do pizza buffet the next morning, 11 a.m. So
okay, no.
We cannot be a disaster of a night.
No, this is what I was going to say. Go to the local Pro Line or somewhere like that. Get the tickets, and then when parents come to the door with kids with good effort in their costumes, you give them like a $5 future ticket.
That's encouraging gambling to youth. If there was
not
ever
to the kid, the adult,
give it to the adult.
Parent. Yes, and then you say like, your kid, great job, and then they'll be like, hey, we got to go to that guy's house, and then your house is a buzz. You're the popular guy in the neighborhood.
Always the popular guy in the neighborhood is the one who gives out the full candy bars.
Yes.
My friend Aaron Bronstetter did that for years. Still does. Full chocolate bars. I don't want to be the most popular house in the neighborhood. I just want the kids to have a good time. Yeah. They get some candy. They move on. I don't want to be the one that then you're setting the expectations too high. What happens on a year where it's Monday Night Football and I got my wife giving out candy? It's not going to be the same experience for the kids.
Yeah.
She's miserable when she's got to answer the door and give out candy. I enjoy it. I get it. But we're going to do a giveaway. Give away a bet stamp, swag bag. Here's what you got to do. It's very simple. Follow Circles Off HQ on Twitter. Post a picture of you in your Halloween costume. It's that simple. Here's what we're going to do. Next episode of Circles Off, we're going to bring up some of our favorites on screen, and we're going to give away a swag bag to who we think had the best costume.
Ideally, reply to the tweet with this episode being out. That's the easiest way to do it. But if not, just tag us in your photo. Tag us on there on Twitter.
How many replies do you think we're going to get? Over, under, 2.5?
No, over. I'll take over on that.
I feel like our audience is not the dressing up audience. Shame on you people who don't dress up for Halloween. It's one time. I'm sure a lot of you have kids. Hell, take pictures of your kid's costume if you want to. I don't care. Just take pictures of a costume. We're going to vote on them.
Yeah, best costume.
And we'll send out a nice swag bag. And these aren't no BS swag bags of like a t-shirt and some socks. There's going to be some good stuff in there.
There might be socks in there.
It's very possible there's a t-shirt and socks, but also more stuff on top of that. More stuff on top of that for the number one costume that replies to Circles Off HQ. And speaking of number one, the number one sportsbook in all the land, at least in Ontario, where they are regulated. That's Pinnacle Sportsbook. 25 years in business for a reason. We preach line shopping here on Circles Off. I'd go as far as saying you're an idiot if you don't line shop. Absolutely one of the dumbest things you can do as a sports bettor. And Pinnacle has the best everyday competitive odds. Bet smart, bet Pinnacle, your trusted sportsbook for the past 25 years, and use code HAMMER, HAMMER, if you sign up to Pinnacle, as it does help support us here on Circles Off. Trying to give Zach a raise. Sign up to Pinnacle using code HAMMER. I want to be able to pay this guy what he deserves for dealing with us on a weekly basis. You must be 19 plus, licensed in Ontario, not available in the US. And as always, around the Halloween season, but every time of year, please play responsibly. Don't let it get out of hand for you. Just don't. Our guest this week on Circles Off is a sports bettor, in particular specializing in basketball, NBA, WNBA. He does it all. He's a fellow Torontonian as well. He goes by Kirk Evans. You can follow him on Twitter at KirkEvans0. Kirk, Appreciate you joining us here on Circles Off.
Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So we start with every guest in the same way. I do want to get into NBA discussion. NBA season started a couple days ago, and we're going to get into all that first. But with every guest, we like to get a little bit of a background story on them, and specifically how they got involved in the sports betting space. So interested to hear your background story. What got you into sports betting in the first place?
For sure. So I think my story is kind of unique, but then actually takes a path of actually a pretty average professional bettor, which there is no real average professional bettor. But I started doing business school, and then I got my master's in analytics, always with the idea of going into sports analytics in some way. So after school, I got a job with the Kingston Frontenacs, which, OHL team, a minor league hockey team here in Ontario. And my job was to start up an analytics department for them. And this was like right in the middle of COVID. So there were no games and things were a bit slow. And someone who I was working with told me he arbitrage bet the election that had just happened, Biden-Trump. And right away, it just clicked in my head. You can do that? Like, what is going on? I messaged my friend who also was looking to work in sports analytics, who also had done my master's with me, told him about it. And I'll never forget, I was playing basketball and he messaged me, Marquez Valdez-Scantling receptions was 2.4 on one site, 1.9 on the other. And from there, we just kind of started arbitrage betting as a side hustle. But pretty quickly we realized this could be pretty lucrative, especially this was right kind of pre-legalization. Mm-hmm. So everyone was kind of getting ready and sites wouldn't kick you off for this stuff nearly as quickly. So pretty quickly we turned around, created a bot to, notify us of arbitrages. And then it kind of just grew from there to where we are today. So
that was your establishing the bankroll, I guess, in the early going using
Exactly.
arbitrage. I'm assuming nowadays that's probably much less of your overall betting.
So these days we pretty much never arbitrage anything unless obviously it's plus EV on both sides or, like they say, like life-changing money. But yeah, so from there we started arbitraging and then probably did that for around 6 months. And then we got into more information betting. So this was mid-COVID. So players were getting ruled out left and right with COVID, with other injuries. And we realized, if you're quicker to the books on news, you can be having, 5 points of CLV pretty easily. I remember there was a Browns game where like everyone on the roster had COVID. It moved like 13 points. I think it got rescheduled, went back. But we started information betting, but still had kind of that arbitrage bot. And then eventually we came to the realization, if these are arbitrages, there's probably one side of the bet that's more plus EV. So I kind of call that phase of our betting life, betting on training wheels, right? You're betting into a negative hold. You just need to pick which side's right, and you're probably not going to be wrong very often to the point where your bet's negative EV. Much less true nowadays, I would say. I would say even in arbitrage opportunities now, you could definitely take the wrong side. But yeah, we went from there. Then I would say 2 NBA seasons ago, we would always, have odds boards up, look at lines a lot. And we started being able to pick off overnight NBA lines and realize, okay, we think it's good for this reason. And then last summer, we become much more systematic and, okay, this is how we want to attack an NBA season. So we started originating NBA from there. And as the season went, we got much more sophisticated, but always were, I would say, even from the jump, beating the close. But we probably got further along on the spectrum of how late in the day we were confident in betting. Then we decided, we can attack the WNBA market. It's probably a bit softer. We knew nothing about the WNBA, but we took those principles, started originating the W this summer as well, went very well as well. And now we've really evolved our, I would say, sophistication level from there to now where, again, we're getting ready for this NBA season.
So I noticed a lot as you were breaking that down, you weren't using I, you were using we. You mentioned earlier that you went to school with someone that graduated with you and you were working with them. Is it still a two-person operation, or have you expanded that outwards?
Yeah, so now it's a three-person operation. We've added one person. The dynamics are a little different because obviously the third person doesn't come in as a full partner, but still me and the partner from the beginning are full 50-50 partners. And then we've added one additional person.
Got it.
So three people, all full-time bettors. I know that people get very crabby about that on this program.
Yeah, listen, we'll talk a little bit about that. Actually, I might as well bring up a little bit of it now. So I first became familiar with you through BetStamp. You were publicly tracking. I know you still use the platform, but you've opted to take your public account private, which is basically what I did several years ago as well. And to each their own, right? I mean, it's a useful tool, but some people just don't want to have their stuff out there. There's no need to have it out there, so it makes sense to keep it a little bit private. So I first learned about you through BetStamp. You had a very small social following. You still do, not like you haven't really blown up on social, but you've really got into it with certain people in gambling Twitter over the course of the last year or so. So I do want to get into that a little bit later on for sure, because I think that's important to cover. And I'm sure a lot of people that you've gotten into it in the past will probably be watching this one this week with bated breath, looking to pick up on any little thing that you say here. I'm not an NBA bettor myself. I'm throwing to you as the expert in this space with the season starting and you having some knowledge in there. But I'm curious, first of all, you said you play some basketball. Is that like how you got started in NBA betting? Was it a passion for you because you enjoy the sport on the side? Like, what sparked your interest in basketball as a whole in particular?
Yeah, so I think basketball's always been kind of the number one sport I followed. And I always felt like I was kind of on the right curve of, the analytics movement in basketball. I remember when I was like probably 14, 15, I was getting into yelling matches with fellow Torontonians on DeMar DeRozan's true shooting percentage and how, he actually wasn't really helping the offense. I think I tweeted about this recently. The first 11 years of DeMar DeRozan's career, 10 of them, the teams were better with him off the court than on. I don't know. That's a ricochet shot for DeMar DeRozan. But I always was kind of on the analytic side of the NBA. And then once we started betting, it was pretty clear that would be the sport we should attack. I had the best knowledge of it. My partner with I work at also had good knowledge of it. And since we were doing a lot of information betting at the start as well, that's very relevant in basketball, obviously, because there are, very controversial, so much rest, so many rule outs. So it kind of went from our basketball knowledge was by far the biggest. And then also it was a sport we felt like we could attack the easiest.
Can you describe your approach to betting basketball? So obviously having an analytics background, I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is very numbers heavy, very algorithmic, but is there a human component to it as well? Because modelers tend to agree or everyone has their own way of modeling games. Some people purely trust their numbers. Some people want some sort of subjective analysis on the side and they kind of meld it together. How do you approach the NBA, WNBA? Are you merely making a number on a game through mathematics and then betting those? Or is there some sort of level of subjective analysis on the side of that?
For sure. So I'd say when you're pricing any basketball game, you want to get at the most basic level an offensive rating, a defensive rating, and a pace. And then you want to, be able to build that up through modeling. But I would say that our process is far more manual than I think someone would predict with, two people with analytics degrees. Not to say that it's super subjective, because mostly what we are working with are numbers. So we'll build out a lot of tools and models that will give us a number. But we've actually always found that our numbers are more accurate if we go through each game specifically, both take time to price it. I price a lot of things by hand. I think people will laugh at that. But we build a lot of tools to predict, outcomes of games, or even mostly to predict underlying statistics that we think will predict numbers better than, the market will. But we don't, just crunch numbers, spit it out, and then bet it blindly. No.
Can I dig for an example of where you might think that the manual process comes in? I have some experience with basketball betting. I just don't bet basketball anymore. It's never really been a passion of mine. But personally, from my point of view, I always found that it was extremely hard to mathematically project player minutes, as an example. Like when I was big in NBA DFS, I would put together a model, I'd output it, but I'd look at the player minutes. I'm like, this doesn't really make sense for this player. And I'd manually go through games just like you're doing now and adjust the minutes of the players. What are some examples for you of stuff that you feel is just better suited to be done manually rather than having it automated?
For sure. So I think player minutes is a great example. Models work best, and maybe we're just not the best modelers, but models work best, with larger amounts of data, and things swing really quickly in the NBA. And I think a huge component of it is how many injuries there are and what the injury information is. So, a good example is a player's playing with a left ankle sprain. That's a hard thing to train a model to really understand, especially how important listening to what the information is coming from, the coach or himself, how full go are they? Just really focusing on that information aspect of it, I find is much better manually than, through a model.
Yep, that totally makes sense. We started the interview with your journey from kind of arbitrage betting to like attacking overnight markets, now to dabbling more day of games. I get this question a lot through DMs on Twitter, and I'll pose it to you as well, where there are people that have success with one style of betting, and then they want to know, basically they ask themselves, am I ready to take this to the next level? How do I know that I'm ready to take this to the next level? So in your case in particular, you have a lot of success in overnights or whatever, and I'm not diminishing that, by the way. There's still like some decent limits overnight. You can make money that way, but a lot of people will just continue forward with that and be like, this is working for us. We're doing a high ROI. Keep pressing forwards. What made you take the next step to saying, okay, forget about that. We're going to move on. We're going to attack bigger limits, more efficient market, and dabble in that?
For sure. I think it's really in betting very challenging to know, like, are we ready to bet numbers, at this time, when the market's 5x as liquid as it would be for overnights. Like me personally, generally I'm getting down between 8:30 a.m. and 10 a.m. and then waiting for injury news, and we'll attack that throughout the day as well. And when I say injury news, I don't mean, LeBron James is out, bet it. I mean, LeBron James is out, what does the line come back as? Honestly, my advice would be, you got to test it out. And that doesn't even have to necessarily be betting it later in the day, but you have to say, I think X bet is good, Y bet is good, and then track it to close. I think BetStamp's actually, not to plug you guys too hard, but BetStamp's actually a great example of a site you could use where if you think you can beat, 9 a.m. lines in the NBA because you're beating overnight, just track 50 bets on BetStamp, see if you beat the close. And if you did, you're probably pretty likely to be able to beat it in reality.
Yep. I think that's a valid point as well. I mean, there are ways to see what your success can be at another level without just actually donking off the money to find out type of situation. So I think that's good advice.
I've actually got one more here.
Go ahead.
Piece of advice this is sort of related to that. One thing I've always done, and I think people on gambling Twitter might really disagree with me here, but always I DM people who I think have a better grasp of the market, pretty much all the information I have and what bets I think are good. I did that for FIBA this summer. I've done that for props at the beginning of the NBA season, because there are people on Twitter who are better than you at betting, and they will like if you're sending them good information, and typically they'll respond if they think your information is good. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. I definitely did that with props. There's a prop bettor, Adam Ewenstein, on Twitter. I sent him, 50 props to start the NBA season last year. he responded being like, yeah, I'm betting a lot of the same stuff. I think your process is good. And that just kind of gave me the confidence of, oh, okay, I can do this by myself. And then I'm still definitely friends with him, talk to him all the time. But good bettors will give you the time of day if you're giving them good information. So to me, that's been a very plus EV strategy. I don't know if people agree with me or, people are very secretive with their information, but it's hard to confirm, you can beat that market if you've never tried.
I think this will make for an interesting conversation piece. I agree and disagree through experience. The one challenge that I faced personally in situations like this, and I was probably at a very similar point to where you are now, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and I really looked up to some people on gambling Twitter, Grooven, Mahooven, rest in peace, some other people, Dale Doback, that aren't around anymore, that I used to DM regularly. The challenge is whether or not you can trust that they're being truthful with you. And that's the inherent difficulty with the space that we deal with. I think the ratio of scumbags to decent people in the betting space is a lot higher than that in most other spaces. So that's always the inherent challenge, I think, in these types of situations is, yes, I think it's good to seek advice, and some people are going to be authentic with you, but you just have no way of knowing whether or not they truly are.
100% agreed. So as a caveat to my advice, I would say try interacting with the person first. And obviously it's hard. Not everyone, a lot of people on Twitter are behind not even their real names, including myself. It's hard to know how truthful someone is, but I also think you can get a sense. I've never had that, or maybe I haven't, I don't know. I've never had someone who I think has really lied to me and put me on the wrong path. But I totally agree that the ratio of scumbags to non-scumbags is higher on gambling Twitter for sure.
You mentioned, sending out player props to someone else that you respected in the space. With your process being more manual than people would think, is that a challenge to come up with actual good player props? Is it extremely time consuming? I imagine that it has to be.
The challenge is the time. I find that that's clearly the next frontier of our team, and what we do is we need more automation, especially with props. Is very manual, and there are thousands of props every day in the NBA. So I would say I pretty much never on a full game, 8-game, 10-game slate will get through every team and every game in props, because I am doing that. That's really a very manual process for us. It's also been super successful, but 100%. It's a challenge. I think time is really the resource we lack the most on our team.
If going forwards, first, what's your breakdown, rough breakdown now of wagers that are props versus major market sides, totals, money line?
So in terms of percentage of bets, it's probably more props, but in terms of actual money and volume, it's definitely probably 80% sides, totals, 20% props.
Is that the split that you'd like to see going forwards, or do you envision yourself in a couple years having something drastically different than that right now?
I haven't really thought about it. I think the split we have right now is pretty healthy. Maybe if we could automate props more, going slightly more for props, but just the nature of the bet, you can get 10x on a side in total than you can on a prop, even if you're betting a prop in a lot of spots.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just curious about that. That's not really accelerating the conversation at all, but was just interested in your take on that. We do want to accelerate this in terms of making this educational in some sense for people that are watching, that are looking to bet NBA over the course of the season, any sort of basketball. I think a lot of this is going to be applicable. But with the NBA season having started a couple days ago, can you share something related to NBA betting that you think maybe the casual or average NBA bettor might not be aware of?
For sure. So I think that the casual NBA bettor maybe would think that what I'm about to say is relevant, but the slightly sharper NBA bettor probably is going to be surprised by this. How much narrative matters. in the NBA in certain spots. And I would say I learned this the hard way. The perfect example is last year, LeBron, to break the record. I think he averaged around 28 points. He needed 35 and a half. I think whatever the odds were like 25% if it was a normal game. I'm hammering the under all day. And people are hammering the over. I'm like, oh, obviously every square in the world wants to bet this over. Who cares? It's going to go against me. I don't care. You watch that game for 3 minutes. You know that he is going for that. Not that he had a 100% chance of getting it, but I was wrong. The market was absolutely right. So I kind of look at it as like that Dunning-Kruger chart, where it's like if you're square in the middle, you're like, oh, LeBron can't just decide to get 35 and a half. But once you really start paying attention, it's like, no, those things matter a lot. Like Steph, the year prior, the 3-point record, he didn't get it. He had a terrible game, but his line was crazy high. And right away from that game, again, you could tell he was going for it. A couple other examples would be last year, Dallas versus the Bulls when they rested Luka and Kyrie to get their top 10 protected pick. That team was doing everything possible to lose that game. Maybe not the players, but the organization was desperately trying to lose. And then I don't think this is really a secret anymore in the market. The away team loses 2 games in the playoffs and goes home. That first half spread is going to be heavily moved towards the team now playing at home. Those are all things that are, that's not really by the numbers. That's not really analytics. It's all pretty small sample, but those things really matter.
Okay. I find this very interesting because this phenomenon exists across multiple sports, but I think in the case of the NFL, as an example, I think eventually the market catches up, right? So the example is NFL Week 17. There's the incentives, the players that are playing for bonuses, right? And this came up many years ago. I still remember Antonio Brown walking off the field in that final game of the season because he wasn't going to, get his bonus or whatever. But that was a thing for several years. It came to the forefront. More and more people were talking about it. And then all of a sudden, it just wasn't a thing in Week 17 anymore. And all the lines either got beat really heavily early or became or were posted in like the right spots. Do you think that the advice you're giving now, I think, is very sound, but do you not have to weigh it against the actual numbers in some capacity? Like, is there a chance that this year maybe we get similar situations and we get to another extreme, as an example?
I think it's possible, but I think in the NBA, like that NFL example, that's so like systematic. That's kind of one example. Versus in the NBA, it's much more sporadic as to what these examples are. Like when teams are trying to lose, when teams are tanking, stuff like that, or even records being broken. So I think that it's much more challenging for the books to price that stuff right than in the NFL, where it's all Week 17, you can look into a player's contract. It's so easy to know. I'll give another example here. Maybe this is a bad example. Not a bad example, but an example I shouldn't give. Mikal Bridges has played every game of his NBA career. They rested the Nets rested last year every starter other than Mikal Bridges. They played Mikal Bridges 5 minutes. You same game parlay his unders. Max unders, you can make a good amount of money. Those situations are much more niche and nuanced than, players' incentives all at Week 17.
Fair enough. I think that's a good example and illustrates the point even further. You mentioned this a little bit, but in a different capacity than what I want to get at. I think this will be an interesting conversation as well. But for the last couple years, we've seen, I'll use the word phenomenon for the second time in like 5 minutes, but like a league-wide phenomenon basically of players being rested, right? Especially veterans, don't want to put too many miles on old and tired legs, get them to the playoffs healthy. And we've seen some massive line moves off of this stuff because if Kawhi Leonard doesn't play a game, guess what? That has some sort of tangible impact. Whoever it is, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, if they rest, they're star players. And there should be some sort of impact on the line. Typically, that player is out. the market gets steamed into oblivion one way, all that CLV, and for the last couple years, that's been pretty regularly losing. Me and Johnny talked about this on the show before as well, where people get like 10% CLV, 15% CLV, massive moves, and are regularly losing these bets. Do you think that this is, I don't want to call it a one-off because it's been consecutive seasons, still small sample size. We don't see it happen a ton. But do you think this is something that will continue going forwards? And if so, or if not, however, how do you prefer to approach these types of games?
For sure. So I'm not sure that I don't have the data for 2 seasons ago, but I don't remember it being as bad as last year. I talked about this a lot last year. I think if you had a crystal ball and got the bet before any player was ruled out, you maybe would have won a little bit of money. You could have been negative. Last year was pretty unbelievable. I'm not entirely sure what I think because someone actually tweeted at me this recently, and it's pretty interesting. Last year, there was a massive boom in NBA offense, and that increase in offense was actually mostly from the top players in the league increasing their true shooting. So the best players in the league last year actually got much better, and the rest of the league kind of stayed. Their true shooting also increased, but I think it was like the top 100 players, true shooting was up 2%, and then the rest of the league was like 0.7%. So that would imply that it would go the opposite way, and the better players are even more important. I'm not 100% sure what I think. I think the spots are they're very hard to price. So I think the CLV actually probably does mean less in those spots than typically, but I don't foresee that trend continuing. But if it does, I think I'm going to have to dive deeper into it because it was pretty shocking last year.
Out of curiosity, because you also bet the WNBA, I'm curious. I don't bet I bet some WNBA. It's not my own stuff. I don't follow the league at all very closely. But does this type of stuff happen in the WNBA as an example, where you'll get a star player out, massive line move, and then the same type of, like, are there comparisons? Can we draw the same comparison between leagues, or is it just an NBA only thing?
I wouldn't say we could draw the comparison. Well, mostly because the WNBA players actually play. Yeah. So there was way, even as a percentage of games, like I think Deladon missed some time this year, and like the top players in the league pretty much all played the entire season. So much harder to compare. But also I would say in the specific games where players didn't play, I don't think it bear out the same as in the NBA. No, I don't think so.
So there was something, this is many years ago. I've been betting on the NFL since I was, 16 years old, but I would say mid 2000s to the mid 2010s, like a full decade. There was something similar that happened in the NFL where backup quarterbacks making their first start after the starting quarterback got hurt had like an insane against the spread record. And there's part of me that just thinks that maybe these players get more motivated when the star player is out. I never played sports at a professional level. You played some sports, and you mentioned playing basketball and whatever. But in games where our best player or best players were not there, there is something like a tangible feeling that you have as a player of like, we can't mail it. Like everybody's got to give it their all on every shift on, whatever. And it kind of just feels like that's the reasonable explanation, where maybe the players are just giving that much more effort. You'd like to think that players are giving 100% effort at all times, but it's not the case, right? Especially over the course of an 82-game season. That, to me, is the only way that I could possibly describe what I see happening. But I also don't necessarily believe that this is a thing just yet. Like, I think that there's possible we just go into this season, there's a lot of resting that happens, lines move, and then maybe we just win money off of those line moves.
Yeah, I think it's a plausible theory, especially, if you watch the NBA. Anyone who watches the NBA knows these guys are not trying 100% every night. The season gets to a massive slog, January to March. Guys absolutely will phone it in for some games. So I think I actually kind of do like the theory as well, because, generally in those games, players are playing roles that they wouldn't typically play. So, if a number two is now a number one on a game in a game, that's a game they're really going to want to prove themselves. And it could also be a game that really affects their contract, right? If they show, I can play as the number one ball handler on a team. That being said, if I can get bets of, Luka Doncic out, I will be happily taking that line. And if I have to throw the CLV out the window, I still will.
Now, I don't want to misquote you or anything, and you just correct me if I'm wrong, but earlier I asked you a question, and it seemed along the lines of when these types of situations happen, you're not necessarily the person that's going to immediately try to get in and fade that team and like react to that news. It seemed like you prefer to wait until that news is processed and attack like the new number in market. Did I get that correct, or am I off base there?
Yeah, no. So I definitely alluded to that earlier. I would say we certainly do both. Obviously, if you're betting, LeBron James out into an account that could restrict you, they're going to kick you off pretty quickly. So if we can get good information that the market doesn't have, absolutely, we will bet that every time, especially, if you can get it into Penn or Chris or Bookmaker. But we don't necessarily want to just continuously destroy accounts. So just getting, and also everyone knows about Underdog NBA, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's getting that information really at the same time. So it didn't really used to be the case. I know I haven't been doing this for that long, but definitely the way I look at it is an NBA line opens a bunch of times, right? If everyone's healthy and then a player gets ruled questionable, they're essentially reopening that line on the questionable. And then that player gets ruled out. They're now reopening that line with that player out. So you get a lot of opportunities to attack that line. So maybe you don't like it at open, but maybe you think that they're not pricing that questionable right. Maybe you don't think they're pricing that player outright. So definitely a big proportion of our betting is what does the line come back as, for sure.
In your opinion, what are the most significant differences between betting on basketball? We can use the NBA specifically, or basketball, and betting on other sports. Like, how do you adapt your strategies for basketball specifically?
Yeah, so the NBA specifically is definitely, we've covered this a lot, but the NBA specifically, it's all the information. Players are getting ruled out all the time. Sometimes full teams don't play. Sometimes a team is tanking and will shut down their three best players for a month. I know apparently that's not supposed to happen this season. So for the NBA specifically, I think you have to be ready to bet on games where their best players aren't out, or bet on games where their fourth best player aren't out, but also, their sixth best player is out and they're both, wing players. How does that compounding effect work? So for the NBA, it's definitely that. For basketball specifically, it's probably, I guess this is also NBA mostly, but just how closely you have to follow each game and the news of each game. Again, I'm kind of going back to information, but in the NFL, it's true for that as well. But NHL, MLB, I think the market consensus moves off that team much slower than in the NBA.
So I'm very interested in this because when I've modeled NHL for several years, and it's extremely rare. Like part of the process as a bettor is not only like what am I going to bet, but also bet timing. When am I going to enter the market? Who's influencing the market? What do they typically like? And what I've noticed from my own modeling versus the way the market moves in the NHL is typically the market's going to consistently move on or against a specific team for weeks on end. And even my model, right? If I like a team in one game, it's very likely that I'm going to be betting them 2, 3, 4 games in a row or something like that, unless it's a one-off, like a goalie change or something like that. I know a lot of NBA bettors who've told me the exact opposite, which is like from game to game, I'm way more likely to bet on one team game one and then against them in week 2. Is that purely because of the amount of lineup changes that we tend to see, or is it because you're reacting to data quicker in that sport?
I think I think information or lineup changes definitely matters, but I think that it's more than that. So one thing that's interesting about the NBA is, or basketball in general, is shooting is like effective field goal percentage, true shooting percentage, however you want to look at it, is the best indicator of who's going to win that game. You know, if you could get one stat before a game, who's going to win, shooting is the most important, but it's also the stat that takes the longest to regulate. So it has the most noise, but is the most important stat. And I'm talking mostly about four factors here. So the four factors are effective field goal, rebounding, turnovers, and free throws. So I think that adds a really interesting element. And I would also say that in the NBA, how players play together is a much more significant driver of beating the market than in definitely the MLB. I think the MLB is mostly just kind of an individual sport where you have to know how good each individual player is. And then the NHL, I think there is some, synergy of players, but I think if you have good players in the NHL, they're mostly going to work together. Versus in the NBA, I would say there's a lot of how does player X play with player Y.
I think that's really interesting, and yeah, I do, and it makes a lot of logical sense to me. I'd be shocked if at the NHL level we really don't have that complete data to really figure that kind of I'd be shocked if anyone's using that type of stuff in market right now, how X player plays with Y versus X with Z, and I think with most other sports, you're correct. It's more of just an evaluation of the players and not necessarily how they're playing together on the court or field or ice or whatever at the same time. I'm going to ask you a little bit of a personal question here, and then we'll get into some stuff for this current NBA season that just started. But very interested in what your long-term goals are as a bettor, and specifically how you plan to continue evolving your craft. Are you comfortable with where you are now? Do you want to grow substantially? Just on a personal level, what are the goals for you?
Yeah, so I would say I'm never comfortable where I am. I think probably a lot of bettors feel this way. It's the market's always getting better, right? So I think that my general ethos goal is I want to be improving faster than the market's improving, right? Um, but on a personal level, I love uh, beating the market. I think it's really cool, and it's kind of why I wanted to work in sports analytics. I like player evaluation, I like team evaluation, and then it adds another component of the betting side where you get to try beating a market. So I would say, yeah, the general goal is to get better faster than other people get better and faster than the books get better.
One more question in regards to this, because you have the analytics background, and I've come across many, many smart people over the years, much smarter than I am, that either have degrees in stats, analytics, math, whatever, that are publicly posting projections for any sport, whether it's the NBA, MLB, NFL. And you take a step back, or at least I do, and I look at these and I'm like, how could somebody actually post these and not laugh? What do you think makes you different from others in terms of like being able to evaluate and process this all and beat the mark? Like, what, maybe the question should be phrased as, what do you think gives typical analytics people trouble in making an accurate market projection relative to the best of bettors?
It's a really good question, and also certainly a huge pet peeve of mine of people post, oh, here are my win projection totals for the year, and there are win projections that are 13 wins off market. Right. And then they'll go on a podcast and be like, oh, but people always bet the Lakers because they're the most popular team. That's why the market's that way. Why can bettors beat the market and analytics guys not? I honestly think it's a lot of kind of the work they put in. I don't think that Kevin Pelton is putting out a model to try beating the market. I don't think he thinks about that. And I don't think he realizes how challenging that is. So he doesn't put any of the market's inputs into his model. Versus I would say when we're betting, if I'm betting on a team or betting on games and the market's going against me, I'm thinking, okay, my numbers are wrong. We need to figure this out. So I would say it's just kind of a different challenge of beating a market versus being, an analytics guy for The Athletic or ESPN.
Yeah, I think that's valid. The end goals are different for the bettor and the analytics person, and maybe they just don't put their numbers under that much scrutiny when there's no consequences of actually losing money on it. So I think that makes a lot of logical sense. There's going to be a lot of individuals who are looking to start NBA betting this year or get back into it or improve their betting skills. Do you have any advice for individuals that are getting into the sport this year?
For sure. I would say not so much NBA specific, but just in general. I think the gambling community kind of looks at top down or bottom up as two entirely separate things. And, if you're a top down bettor and want to go to bottom up, build out this massive model and try beating the market. I look at it as much more of a spectrum. You're looking at odds all day. Like you said, if someone's betting on one NHL team every day, one day, it's a good shot that they're betting on them the next day. So if you're a top down bettor and you want to become more bottom up, look at it as a spectrum. Try, beating overnights, going slowly, beating props while still having that, kind of like what I did when I said, betting on training wheels. If the market really disagrees on something, try picking a side. So you're betting into a way more negative hold. So if you're trying to become bottom up, don't think of it as you're either top down or bottom up. Think about it as more of a spectrum.
Interesting. This upcoming season, we started a couple days ago, so maybe not as timely and maybe not as actionable, but I still think it's interesting. So give us a bold prediction for this NBA season.
I've got 3 for you. Raptors, I think, win over 45 games. I think the market has them at 36.5. I'm just way off on that total.
Well, I have to stop you there, though, because we just talked about this 5 minutes ago. So there's got to be a legit reason, and I need the explanation as to why we're way off here.
Okay, so sorry. I think that if I had to set a total, I would make it at probably 39.5. But I'm bold prediction. I got to go more bold than over 40
Fair
wins.
enough. I like what you did there.
I think 45 plus wins is a good bet in the market. I don't think someone should go bet their friend minus 110 for over 45 wins. But for the reason, I think the market is way off on the Raptors defense. I think they have a path to being a top 5 defense in the league. And I think that a lot of the reason the total is so low is because people are anticipating trades for Pascal and OG. And at the end of the day, this front office has not traded any of their stars. Lowry left, Fred left. They have a top 6 protected pick out. So tanking is going to be really hard for them this year. The motivation seems to be to win. So I think that last year their Pythag wins was 44 in what was considered a disastrous season. Fred is out, but we get full season of Pirtle and Schroeder, who's whatever. So I think the path to 40 plus wins is very realistic.
Okay, that's number 1. And you said that you have 3 for us in total.
3. So these are all, I don't think, above 50%, but bold predictions.
No one's good. I'm not going to be the guy that digs this up like a year from now and is like, oh, Kirk went 0-3 on these. Like,
I'm going to do
it. We're going 3-3. We're going 3-3.
Okay.
Walker Kessler is going to win Defensive Player of the Year. I think you can get 30-1 in the market right now. Obviously, the path becomes difficult because the Jazz are just not that good of a team, and typically that award goes to someone on a good team. But he was the best rookie defender I can ever remember since following the NBA. I think he was the best rim protecting center in the league last year. People will say Jaren Jackson. Jaren Jackson plays next to Steven Adams. Walker Kessler does not play next to another big. There's a lot of skepticism that he can't turn 23 minutes into 30 minutes. I don't really see why people think that. So Walker Kessler, Defensive Player of the Year. And then this one's pretty bold and got blown up a bit because of the Bucks and Celtics trades. But I think Cavs have the best record in the East.
Interesting.
You can get, I think, maybe 8 to 1 on that in the market. I think they were 54 wins, Pythag last year, got better in the offseason. I think the market's mostly corrected on them, I think, but the market was pretty down on them originally because they had a bad loss in the playoffs. But the playoffs are different than the regular season, and they've been really good with Garland on the floor in the regular season back-to-back years. And they have a second year going into third year player in Evan Mobley, who has, in my opinion, really big upside.
All right. 3 bold predictions, which I promise that I will not come back at you with if we go 0-3. I can't say the same for producer Zach, who does like to clip
All
these.
good.
And,
Zach, you can come at me. You can come at me if I go 0-3.
The 0-3, put the big X up over his face for YouTube shorts and
but
stuff.
I'll have the biggest victory lap for you ready to go if you do go 3 for 3.
Yes.
Even 1 for 3. I'll
that's fair.
Too. Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah. That's fair.
We are fair here on Circles Off, or at least I think that we try to be in most cases. I'm going to throw a couple recent Twitter arguments at you and get your thoughts on them. One way or not. These are not my original thoughts. These are just stuff that I picked up over Twitter that are hotly debated in the Twitter realm. The person who makes more money at sports betting is better at sports betting. True or false?
Definitely false. And I wish Johnny was here because I think he says that on the pod quite a bit. Obviously, there's a correlation between who makes the most money and who's the best. But there are just a million examples of why saying it's a 1-to-1 correlation doesn't make sense. If you think Dan Bilzerian, not you, the proverbial you, think Dan Bilzerian's the best poker player or a top 5 poker player in the world because he found a bunch of rich fish to play with and took them for 100 million. Like, he's obviously not better at poker than, players that he would lose to playing at a poker table, but he might have made more money than them. The example I got into on Twitter was if you win Circa Survivor, $9.5 million prize this year, hypothetically, if you win alone, which probably isn't going to happen, you've now won in the top 99.999 percentile of any bettor in the world. I think anyone would recognize that you're not in that percentile because you won one lucky competition. I also gave this example. I once had an out on a site that matched pin odds on women's college basketball, but it was like 10x the limit. I didn't know one player on one of these teams. I wasn't the best women's college basketball bettor, for that 3 months that out was available to me. I think it's a skill getting accounts, and that is very important, but it's just obviously not a 1-to-1 correlation in my box.
Yeah, so the devil's advocate would say that that's part of the sports betting game. Being able to find that account and being able to get 10x down, which you can at another site, is part of the game of being a sports bettor. And, I can see the point. Like the Circa Survivor one's a great example because I think that's just bullshit, right? Like somebody gets lucky over the course of a 60-game span, whatever, and it's more than that, but whatever, and they make a lot of money, fine. Congrats. The likelihood that they're able to repeat that success is probably extremely small. So I get that. But there is some form of being able to continuously compound winnings and grow and grow and grow to get to scale. We had a conversation before between me and Johnny. It was asked in one of the Q&As that we not the last one we recorded last week, but a previous one down the road. And it was along the lines of, if you had access to 5 sharp bettors in one sport or one syndicate in that sport, which one would you choose to tail? Who's going to have the better number on a game? And I chose the syndicate, as did Johnny. And Johnny's whole reasoning was they have the most money to bet with. Obviously, they've got to that point. We should trust their opinion more. And we both got grilled for that answer. But I've worked with syndicates before. I've worked with the largest betting group in North America. Toronto-based group. And the thing is, you might have 5 originators separate from that, but that one group is going to be processing so much information from so many different people that it's not just their opinion. It's the opinion of everyone within their network that they're somehow collecting, which is going to kill the 5 individual sharp bettors. I think there is some skill to being able to get to that level. Like, a lot of people can't even imagine getting to that level. With that said, I have to agree 100%. Like, there's not a 1-to-1 correlation. There's not. I'm sorry. And anyone who thinks there is, and the people who are making this argument are the ones that have made a lot of money in sports betting, yes. Which I get. You want to give yourself the pat on the back, but it's definitely not a 1-to-1 correlation. It's definitely
for sure. I think it just allows for zero allowance for luck. Like, obviously there's a lot of luck in sports betting, even a lot of luck in getting out in sports betting. So it's very correlated. I'm not saying that the people who make the most money are bad. They're obviously incredible bettors, but it's just not 1-to-1, obviously.
All right. Second one I'm going to throw at you. Trends can be useful in sports betting. True or false?
Like, obviously true. I think there's no one in the world. It depends on, are you saying trends or are you saying trends with like a Z at the end?
Well, I'm not going like the triple Z or all the Zs, or some form of trends can be useful in sports betting. So you say obviously true. Explain how.
Well, isn't everything we analyze trends? Like, if the Boston Celtics start the season winning by 50 points in 3 straight games, that's a trend. Obviously, that doesn't mean that you should bet them to win by 50 in the 4th game. But if that trend isn't changing your analysis from what the Boston Celtics were before the season to what they are 3 games in, you're doing something horribly wrong. Even, I think, as a more prudent example, the NBA season, game 1 to game 2, what happens in game 1 will affect the props for game 2, 100%. Every week in the NFL as well, what happens in that game will change the prop for the next week. So, of course, trends matter. All we deal with are trends. The real challenge is deciphering which trends matter and which don't. And obviously, I'm not saying that, team is a 10-1 against the spread, we got to bet them, at close in the NFL. But all we deal with are trends.
Yes. In a way, you're talking about like reacting to data that becomes available. Like, your opinion on a team or a player or a game or whatever should change based off of previous data, right? Like, that's just part of sports handicapping. The trends that don't matter, like you said, are, the ones that are dating back to 1978 when it was like completely different game and different players, or whatever a team's record is on a certain day of the week. Like, these are obviously non-factors in sports. You've been known to dish it and be on the receiving end of some gambling Twitter hate. Surprise, surprise. Been there before, lived through it. What is it about you that makes you so polarizing in the space?
It's a good question. I think one thing that definitely at the start had me really polarizing was the BetStamp account and posting my picks publicly. I think most, serious bettors on Twitter looked at that as very, less than, and were very not happy about that. I have one specific person who DM'd me, said I was the same. I was very similar to, someone who's scamming people who make them pay for their accounts. I'm sorry, not pay for their accounts, pay for their picks, who was a widely known loser. So I think people really didn't like that. And I'm actually about to double down. If you are an up-and-coming sports bettor, I think posting picks is incredibly plus EV. You talked about the biggest Toronto-based syndicate. It's very hard for people to know if you are good or not. But it's really easy for people to know if you're good, if you're posting picks, especially if you're beating major markets. So now pretty much everyone I bet with is from some relationship that I've built on Twitter. Everyone I bet into, like, give them my plays and they get down for me. So it has been wildly plus EV for me to do that. And I think if you're up and coming and need more outs or want more liquidity, proving that you're actually good at sports betting is super important.
I actually love that piece of advice because I actually owe almost everything I have in life to just posting baseball and hockey numbers to Twitter. I had no idea that my stuff was even good at that time. I had no contacts in the space, basically no confidence in myself until that happened and people started to actively reach out to me to let me know how valuable the stuff was. I had no idea. So I actually think it's a really good piece of advice for those that are out there. Not only for you just like personally track for your own personal purposes to know whether or not you're winning or losing over a long period of time, but also if you're looking for visibility, there's a lot of people in the space that are going to reach out to you and want to work with you, maybe offer you a free roll, maybe you take on some risk or whatever, but it leads to opportunity. So I actually think that's a really good piece of advice that a lot of people should learn from out there, especially if you're undercapitalized or just don't even know who to reach out to in the space. So I really like that piece of advice. Do you think that the people who typically hate on you will watch this interview and feel any differently about you?
Probably not. I think also that answer took all the liability off me. I definitely deserve a lot of blame for the fighting I get into on Twitter. Gambling Twitter is like a really weird world where like you're just supposed to know that, you know, person X with a weird Twitter handle is like one of the best gamblers in the world.
Right.
And when I kind of started getting, you know, people, not a big following, but started having some followers and kind of got exposed to the space, I was like, who the hell are these people who just shit on everyone and then never post anything? But it turns out those are some really good gamblers. I'll give them credit. And I do have some relation with some of the people I'm talking about. So I think that was definitely a big reason as well. I came at some guys who are pretty big. And then I also I find it pretty fun. I like getting into it and it's pretty entertaining. But to your question of will they look at me differently? Shipper was on here a few weeks ago, and I thought he was great on here. So maybe, hopefully, I'm doing well, but it's a hard question.
Yeah, I know it's tough. I'm asking you to put yourself in like somebody else's shoes and think about how they would react, and not all these people are, you know, fully sane. Let me just put it at that as well. So
I think we saw that yesterday for sure.
Yeah, we see some stuff out there in the space that definitely makes me think twice about everything in life. Couple final questions we ask to every single one of our guests, and I want to get your thoughts. Doesn't have to be sports betting related. It can be, might not be, totally up to you. But one thing that you think is plus EV in life and one thing that you think is minus EV in life.
So for my plus EV, I'm going changing your mind. I think there's a weird stigma that changing your mind is a bad thing. Like, you should be changing your mind on something literally every day. You should always be changing your mind. To me, you don't want to be like too fickle, obviously, but I like to think about it as any opinion I hold, if I'm presented with better information, I will change my mind on that. I don't want to be so emotionally tied to my opinions. Negative EV, and I've thought about these, way harder to think about negative EV than positive EV. I think you guys always say that because you're always just thinking like it's the opposite of positive EV. Negative EV, obviously in spots, but I'm going optimization. So I think another way you could say it would be like perfect is the enemy of good or great is the enemy of good. Like I see a lot of people, I'll give like in the fitness space or the eating space, you know, they're not eating perfectly. So then they're kind of like, oh, why am I doing this at all? But like, you don't want to go from bad to perfect. You want to go from bad to incrementally better, incrementally better, incrementally better. So don't be discouraged by not being, you know, fully optimized. Just like have the goal of get better.
Two very good pieces of advice. And I agree with both of them, especially the plus EV, but both as a whole. If you could go back 5 years and talk to a previous version of yourself, what advice would you give to your old self?
Definitely not gambling related at all. But I think like 5 years ago, I was in university. I think I definitely looked at like meeting new people and like making new friends as this thing like, oh, I don't want to do that. But if I could go back 5 years, I would say, try being more outgoing and meeting new people. Like, I think that's just a really good general ethos to have in life is meet new people and try to like, diversify the people you know.
It's 3 good pieces of advice to end the show here with Kirk Evans. You can follow him on Twitter at Kirk Evans 0. This has been a pleasure. I think this went really well. I'm not a huge NBA bettor myself or basketball bettor, and I've actually learned a lot over the course of this interview. So hopefully those who are watching or listening in podcast form found value in it. If you did find value here on YouTube, smash that like button down below. Subscribe here to Circles Off. If you're listening in audio form, make sure you rate and review 5 stars. For myself, Rob Pizzola, for Zach Phillips, for our guest, Kirk Evans, for Pinnacle Sportsbook, being the #1 sportsbook in the space. This has been Circles Off. Episode number 125. Peace out. We'll catch everyone next week.